ClancyPasta presents Snowman Family, written by GorillaOfUndeath. A frigid wind rushed through the fenced-in backyard, scraping across the top of the snow and making me shiver under the cold moon of night. The warmth I had gained from the exertion of shoveling nearly a foot of snow had faded. The snow had a reflective glint from the light of the moon, fitting that, as I continued building the snowman, that I reflected about things in my head. After all, my only company was my thoughts in the wintry night. I guess it could be said that the snowman I was crafting could have kept me company, but it is hard to relate to something so cold and lifeless. A fierce snowfall had affected our neighborhood over the past few days, and many of the usual snow clearing services were tied up with jobs bigger than a small neighborhood's driveways and roads. The snow had finally subsided, but I had made my way to my ungrateful ex-wife's house to shovel her driveway for the third time this week. Letting too much build up just made it too heavy. After what she put me through, you would think she could at least be thankful, but even that seemed too much to ask. When I arrived, she seemed barely awake and rudely told me to just get it done, like I was her slave, and not doing this out of charity. That a man would even show up to help his ex-wife was rare, but to then treat him like that would be enough to send many men over the edge. I figured I would finish up at her house and move on to some other houses, maybe get some extra cash before the people in the morning all woke up and tried to do the same. I was just getting ahead of the competition, but my snowman took precedence over that. My hands felt cold as I picked up more of the freshly fallen snow. Carefully, I packed the last bit and stepped back to look at my creation. It was one of the greatest snowmen I had ever created. Or maybe it was better to describe that one as a snow woman, since I had intended that one to be female. A mother, in fact. When my daughter saw it in the morning, I knew she would be so excited. I had even borrowed some of my ex-wife's clothes in order to make the snow woman a little bit more familiar and motherly. A cool pink hat and scarf decorated the snow woman, along with the carrot nose, the button eyes, and some eyelashes to make it more feminine. I tried to add my own special touch with some lipstick that I hoped would make some definable lips, but the result was a smeared mess that was runny and distorted. The lips seemed to drip red, like blood oozing from a split lip in winter. It was not perfect, but I knew my daughter would love it when she awoke in the morning. My task was not yet completed, though. Certainly, a snow woman would like someone to spend time with, someone to accompany her on these cold days. I had a second metal pole that sat nearby in the surrounding snow. I grabbed the metal pole and stood it upright next to the snow woman before pushing it down into the deep snow until it touched the hard, wintry ground. To get the metal pole down any further would require some sort of hammering that I could not afford to do at that moment. The deep snow held the pole firmly in place, just as it had done for the first pole that aided in creation of the snow woman. I picked up my shovel and made my way out of the backyard as quietly as I could. The next stop was the gentleman's house across the street, and I only say gentleman loosely. Randy was his name. A trucker fellow who wasn't home a lot, though the snow had kept him in this time. Randy was your typical badmouth know-it-all, the kind of guy who'd always end up in a fight at the bar. I was sure he would want his driveway shoveled, though. In fact, I had shoveled his place many times in the past out of generosity. A bit of anger flared up in me as I reflected about the day I found him lying with my now ex-wife. It was the catalyst for our divorce 2 years ago, and Randy and I were not on good terms. But I would offer to shovel his driveway anyway. It was a sort of peace offering that I had hoped he would take. I rang his doorbell twice, and there was no answer. Still, I was sure he wanted his driveway shoveled, so I persisted in pressing the doorbell until at last Randy came to the door. He nearly pulled the door off its hinges, he was so angry, but it didn't faze me. Randy's face was red with rage, and he was dressed in a t-shirt and shorts. It was clear he was in bed for the night and that I had disturbed him. My hand rested in my pocket, just waiting for my moment. "It's the middle of the night. What the hell are you doing here, Chris?" he yelled. "I'm just here to shovel your driveway," I said. "Shovel my driveway? You woke me up for this? What the fuck is wrong with you? No wonder your wife..." I didn't need to hear him finish that sentence. In one fluid motion, I pulled the syringe from my pocket and stabbed it into his neck. I pushed down on the plunger, and the paralyzing toxin quickly transferred to his bloodstream. His eyes went wide with shock, and I pushed him back onto the floor before stepping inside his house and closing the door behind me. Randy twitched on the floor as I bent down next to him. He tried to talk, but his words were nothing but a slur. I laughed at his feeble attempts to move, but already the toxin was taking effect, and his actions were uncoordinated and weak. Soon he would be paralyzed, a prisoner in his own body. At least he would be for as long as the toxin took hold of him. "Don't worry, pal. It's not going to kill you. Hang tight for a bit," I laughed. "As if you have a choice, but hey, I'll shovel your driveway for you, so that's one thing you won't have to worry about," I said, and then left him there on the floor as I went to take care of his driveway. Warmth returned as I worked. Each scoop of snow seemed to relieve my stress and frustrations and keep me warm against the cold winds. There was something therapeutic about shoveling snow then, but what was even more therapeutic was making the snowmen, which I was ready to do once again. I went back inside to Randy's house and saw him lying there on the floor. His eyes were wide with fear, and I could see the toxin had taken full effect. He was conscious. His eyes were able to follow me, but the rest of his body was limp and useless. Next was the difficult part of getting him across the street. I tried to pick him up and carry him, but he was far too heavy. Essentially, he was dead weight, and I figured it'd be easier to just drag him by his legs, but even that was rigorous, though not impossible. I ended up pulling him across the street by his legs in the dead of night, the people in the surrounding houses none the wiser. His face was pulled through the rough snow, and I'm sure it would hurt like hell if he could have felt it. By the time I finished dragging him, his face was bloody and had begun to puff up. I dragged him right up to that metal pole that rested in the snow before I had to stop and take a breather. When I had caught my breath, I pulled Randy up to his knees and then pushed him towards the metal pole until his back rested against it, his legs splayed out behind him. Getting him to keep his back straight took a lot of effort, much more than the snow woman. Randy's body would continuously slump down, and I would have to pull him back up until I got him securely tied to the pole and in the perfect position. His skin was already turning blue from the cold. Frostbite had taken over much of his body. I took a few moments to walk around him and make sure every rope was secure. Randy's eyes followed me when I was in front of him. "I just wanted to shovel your driveway. You didn't have to be so damn rude," I said. Randy's eyes went wide, and I could see that fear had now evolved into terror. I think he realized his mistake, but it was too late for him. I had a snowman to build, and nothing was going to stop me. I carefully picked up some snow and started packing it around Randy's legs and feet. Most people just lazily roll snowballs and then stack them together, often creating a misshapen nightmare of a snowman that will fall over in 2 hours. I was using a metal pole and a dirtbag trucker, so my first step was to get enough snow packed around his feet and legs first, and then I go through the art of molding that first large ball of snow that will cover the lower half of his body. I had to shape the snowball methodically, carefully packing the snow into a rounded form. It took a lot of time, but I had eventually packed together the largest snowball around Randy's lower body. The first snowball came to rest at about his stomach area. His eyes had changed from terror to absolute defeat as I started to pack snow around his chest and back to start forming the second part of the snowman. I thought Randy must have known that even if he did escape somehow, his body had been ravaged by frostbite. His limbs would surely have to be amputated, and if they could save him, he would have to undergo hellish skin grafts that would leave him in nightmarish pain for weeks or months, maybe even years. The time ticked by as I packed and packed the frigid snow. Randy was in and out of consciousness, still paralyzed from the toxin. At last, the second rounded figure took form, and Randy was buried in snow up to his head. Randy took one last look at me, a look of pleading in his eyes. But that was not going to work on me. I guess he was not as smart as I took him for earlier. This was the merciful path at this point. And besides, I had a snowman to finish. Nobody was going to stop me. The first bit of snow I packed went into his eyes, and then around his chin and up to his mouth. Before long, Randy was covered in the cold snow that sealed his fate, and the snowman was almost complete. The last and most important thing to do was to customize the snowman. After all, it's only 3 snowballs if you don't add some extra features. I needed something for a hat, so I made my way back over to Randy's house. Cracking open his door, I made my way inside, tracking wet, slushy snow throughout his house. I'm sure he would not mind me borrowing some things of his after I shoveled the driveway for him. I searched his closet, and what a mess it was. A pile of pornographic magazines sat atop a bunched-up pile of clothes that I guess he had been too lazy to hang up, judging by the numerous hangers that hung with no clothes on them. As I went to move the magazines, a couple of pictures fell out. Looking through them, I could see they were pictures of my ex-wife, though one picture in particular stood out. It was a photo of my then pregnant wife. Randy stood beside her with a large smile and a hand on her belly. I took a deep breath and then tossed the picture to the ground. This was not surprising to me in the least. I'd already caught them in the act, but the pictures seemed to show their affair had been going on for a long time. I tossed the rest of the pictures aside and checked the pile of clothes. I found a brilliant red tie that would work perfectly. It even matched the color of lipstick on the snow woman. I needed a nice hat though, and I knew that he would not own a top hat, so I found a regular black winter hat that I figure would do the trick. I made my way back to the snowman and put the tie around its neck, and the hat went onto its head. A couple of button eyes and a carrot nose later, and I now had a beautiful snow couple that my daughter would love when she saw it in the morning. The dark of night was already starting to break, and the sun was fast rising. I sat on the ground cradling my legs and trying to keep warm by rocking back and forth. Eventually I fell asleep for a few moments, but came to and saw the snow couple still standing before me with joyful smiles on their faces. The sun had risen, and it was time for my daughter to see these masterpieces. I made my way out of the gated backyard and trudged up the front steps of the house before ringing the doorbell. I rang it 3 times and waited with nervous excitement. Eventually, I rang it again, and the door finally opened. My daughter stood at the door groggily, her hair frazzled and all over the place from sleep. "Daddy, what are you doing here? Where's Mom?" she asked me. "Hey, sweetie. Daddy's here because I shoveled the driveway, but I've got a big surprise for you in the backyard. You should get dressed and come outside," I said. Her eyes lit up when I said surprise. They always do. Any sort of tiredness that still lingered in her seemed to disappear as she ran upstairs to get dressed, yelling in excitement about a surprise on the way up. When she came outside, she grabbed my hand and nearly pulled me towards the backyard, but I stopped her and said she had to close her eyes before we opened the gate. She closed her eyes, and I unlatched the gate and directed her inside until she was just a few feet from the snow couple, with her eyes shut tight and breathing in anticipation. "Okay, sweetie. Go ahead and open your eyes," I said. She opened her eyes, and I could see the excitement in her face grow. She had a great smile as she looked at the snow couple in awe. She remained speechless as she walked around them, almost inspecting them, and then came back to me and gave me a great big hug. "Well, what do you think? They are a nice couple, aren't they?" I asked. "They're so perfect," she said with a gleam in her eye, and she turned around to look at the snowman again. "But I think there is something missing." I rested my hands on her shoulders. "Oh? What's that?" "There needs to be a baby snowman too. They should have a kid." I laughed and reached into my pocket. I had another syringe ready to go. "You know, I was thinking the same thing," I said as I stabbed the syringe full of the paralyzing toxin into her neck. She turned around and gave me the oddest look I've ever seen as she fell to the ground and looked up at me with confusion. I could see the resemblance to Randy now. They both had that dumbfounded look when I stabbed them. She was trying to talk, but I soothed her. "Don't worry, sweetie. You just lay there for a bit. Daddy needs to get a new pole and do some shoveling. I'll be back after I shovel a bit, and we'll make that kid snowman." Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I want to give a huge thanks to all of my supporters over at Patreon and YouTube memberships. Your support makes these narrations possible, and I appreciate it a ton. If you'd like to join these lovely ghouls, you can head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/ClancyPasta, or click the join button below to become a member. And if you'd like creepy cool shirts, make sure to head on over and check out my official merch store for some awesome tees, hoodies, stickers, and more. Alright. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.